we're up to. The last thing we did was a thing about sometimes it references God as riding as ascending upon the cherubs, the keruvim of the Aron, plural, and then other times it's God rides on a single keruv, on a single cherub. So that was the last thing we were talking about last week. Okay. And then we might have read a couple lines, but we didn't really have time to get into it. So go out from here. Happy are you? You have that?
Puku mehacha zakon atun nafku. Yavlan hahumamana varda.
The official gave them another rose. Now it never mentions the first rose. So that's because that must have been in the part of the Rav Mesivta that is missing. And they left.
Kadnafku astum pum ma'arta v'lo
As
ischaze klo.
As they came out of the mouth of the cave, it closed, and it could not be seen at all. So it's kind of like one of the cool things. And again, though, the rose, right? We say that there's the 13-petaled rose, which is like connected to the 13 attributes of divine mercy. And we're compared to a rose between the thorns. And here it's about stopping to smell the roses. I wonder if the idea of stopping this to smell the roses is from this Zohar, as we'll see. Okay. Then they saw the eagle descending from the tree.
V'al go ma'arta achra.
And entering into another cave. Now remember, the eagle is Rabbi Eloi of Nispis that takes on the form of an eagle. That's one of the faces of the Merkava. So he descended to the tree, entered into another cave. They smelled the rose. And they went into there.
Ashkachu hahu nishra apum arta.
They found the eagle at the mouth of the cave.
Amalon ulu zakoi keshot chavran.
And he said to them, enter. Who knows what holiday we invite guests in with the word ulu? One of the three holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkot. Anyone want to guess?
Sukkot.
Sukkot, that's right. We say, Ulu ushpizin Elohim, welcome in, enter, holy ushpizin, our holy guests. So that's an Aramaic word. So he said, enter.
Maybe the halach ma'anya is like the ulu of Passover.
Yeah.
You know, come inside. Okay. The halo chamina chedva de chavrusa.
For since the day I have arrived here, I have not seen the joy of companionship except through you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, that's a pretty big praise. I mean, he wasn't there that long, but he might have been there, a year or two or 3 or 4 or 10 or whatever it is. And he's like, there's never been such hush of a guest. At this point, you have to assume that one of the people of the companions, because it doesn't really outline who they all were at this point, would include the Rashbi to get that level of praise. So let's talk a moment about smelling the rose. We mentioned last week that there are certain parallels here in the Zohar from another very significant body of literature, prototype to Kabbalah, what we call the Hechalot or Merkava literature. And in it, in the journeys or the ascent or descent of the Yardei Merkava, as they're known, those who descend into the chariot or into the mystical worlds, they come upon gatekeepers that are angels that are terrifying, and you need to know certain names and you have to have certain mystical keys to be able to get in. So the rose we already did last week was like you produce the rose. I guess we did, that's where we must have gotten up to this page. But before we even get to the producing the rose as a key, as a signifier that they're worthy of entering, which again sounds very much like stories of, I don't know, King Arthur and his knights type of things of having to, some kind of fantastical tales of having to get one thing to get to the other thing, right? David Barrett is calling. Let me tell him we're on. David, could you not get in? You can't get in. Zev, could you resend the link to David Barrett?
Yes, I'll do it right now.
Okay, Zev will send it to you. Okay, no problem. Okay, so there's another thing. Okay, so that was one aspect that still stands. That's still correct. But then the second aspect is smell. So we know that there's this concept that of all the senses that we have, smell is the least physical. And part of what this Zohar is going to be establishing is this concept of the Zua Mashal Nachash, the kind of the primeval Yetzer Hara, the Mavet, the death in the world. And it's going to explore different elements of it. And also in that will be an understanding of what the rebirth is in Olam Haba, in the next world. How we shed whatever our kind of association and attachments, for lack of a better word, to the parts of our Yetzer Hara body to make room for the not just the soul, but a guf zach, which is something that Nachmanadies talks a lot about. So people who try to compare a book of the Zohar to something like Nachmanadies would be able to find parallels to this section of the Zohar that we're about to do, and Nachmanadies' conversation in his Shar HaGemul, amongst other places, about the concept of the guf zach, this kind of cerebral, spiritual, rarefied body, a body that somehow exists, yet isn't like physically tempted to do wrong, which is, again, how do you cross over between physicality and a spiritual reality that the Ramban and the Zohar together to some degree understand the tachlit hashlemut, the kind of the ultimate goal is not souls not in a body, but ultimately souls in a body. Okay, we'll dedicate this learning tonight for the schut of the amazing Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose Yartziet is tonight, and all the work that he inspired, the holy work that he inspired in the Shluchim and beyond. And he often would quote this Ramban, this Ramban about the tachlis, the purpose being to be a neshama beguf, a body and a soul, with Chias HaMesim rather than the Rambam. And he would always say when there's a machlokus between the Rambam and the Ramban, since the Ramban is on the side of the Nistar, of the Kabbalists, we accept his opinion. His opinion is the valid opinion. It doesn't mean every debate between the Rambam and the Ramban, but a debate like this. And we all know the Rebbe was a big fan of the Rambam, with limits, obviously. This is one of the many limits. So this Zohar is going to introduce this concept of transitioning. And right now, the transition, the smelling the rose to be able to enter, represents a kind of increase of holiness, which the sense of smell represents, which the 13 attributes represent, which the being presented with the rose represent. It represents, in a sense, the rarefied reality that a person creates in this lifetime through the Torah and the mitzvahs that they've done, which interestingly enough is a Maimonidean concept. The Maimonides, particularly in the Moreh Nevuchim, talks at great length about creating Olam Haba or Gan Eden through a mindset of detachment from the physical world while we're here in the flesh. In other words, we start entering into a intellectual / spiritual reality. Maimonides didn't see Maimonides, contrary to what many people just try to classify him as a rationalist, and of course there's a strong rational undercurrent there. His rationalism was to some degree had a mystical component into it. It believed that the mind could form a union to some degree with the divine, limitedly, because he understood that it was more via negativa, which meant via negativa wasn't just a intellectual concept of that we can only know God by what he is not. It was much more than that. You have to study the guide to see how much more than that it really is. He describes how far you can go with that concept. But that concept is also a psychological thing where a person detaches themselves from the Yetzer Hara, from the evil inclination. And by doing that, they start smelling the roses. Understand what smelling the roses is in Maimonides and the Zohar, really? It's creating a spiritual reality in the physical world because you become less enslaved by the materialism of this world. So smelling the roses means you're entering into the idea of smell is that it's there living side by side with us, but if you don't stop to smell it, you won't even notice it. So the idea of smelling the roses here represents living a life in this world where we stopped what we were ordinarily doing in the physical thing and detached ourselves from our over corruption to it. And we're going to see that in the Zohar. So anyway, that's what it means. They smelled the rose and entered there. We'll see what we're talking about. Yes, Rebbe Yossi, you're on mute, so take yourself off mute. Yossi, you're on mute.
Myself. There we go. Okay. How does this tie in with this concept? Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, now I hear you.
Okay. Because smell really is so connected with taste. If for instance, the sense organ of smell somehow is damaged or debilitated, taste also doesn't work. And that's that famous thing, Psalm 34:8, taste and see or know that the Lord is good.
Yeah. So smell enhances our taste. And there should be ultimately a taste, like you said, Tamu Ru'u Kitov Hashem, the tasting of the divineness. But the problem with taste is that a lot of great mystics, especially Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, would often say that even when you're eating kosher food, so there's no issue of whether it's permitted, it is permitted, but you're enjoying the food too much, he sees that as a gateway to ta'ivot, to desire, to open, it whets your appetite for other types of pleasures in this world. So he's anti-enjoying your food too much. I love Rabbi Nachman. I don't take every of his teachings fully. I probably should take that one a little more. I enjoy food too much, but you understand why you're correct, Rabbi Yossi, that eating and smelling complement each other. But there's certain Talmudic and then midrashic things about smell. I think, for example, we say you're not moel behektish. There's a concept that me'ila is like when you violate a object's sanctity by appropriating it for your own personal use without redeeming it first, so to speak. So I don't think the laws of me'ila apply to benefiting from a smell because it's considered intangible. But that intangibility has to do also here with like that it represents the sense that's the least physically harmful for the soul. In the sense that it's a sense, but it's semi-mystical. It's the gateway to heaven as opposed to others, which are gateway to.
That makes me think of what it says about korbanos, that they make a reach nichoach l'Hashem.
Very good. Yeah, that's a good point. So we're particularly connecting one of the senses that we have to God, so to speak, metaphorically, having pleasure from the reach nichoach, from the aroma. Okay, let's go on. They arrived at another orchard, which we know that Akat Tapuch Kaddish. Go on.
Sorry, what page are we on? I'm sorry.
We're on page 59. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry.
What volume?
Volume 9.
Okay, thank you.
Alu matu lapardes achra v'hu nishra bahadayu.
Go on.
Had matu lagabe inun mareon the mishnah.
They reached the master of Mishnah.
Is hadar ahu nishra b'diyukna de adam belvush yakar.
The eagle turned into the image of a man with a splendorous garment.
Minahara kevasayu v'yosef imam kachada.
Illuminated, radiant like them, and he sat down together with them. Okay,
Amar
why don't we stop and have Zev read notes 16 through 18.
So 16 is on the official gave them another rose. Evidently, the companions had already received one rose, but that part of the story is missing both in the manuscripts and the printed editions. See above note 1, which talks about how it started in the middle of a sentence. Note 17 on they saw the eagle, namely Rabbi Eli, who's very glad to meet them. By inhaling the aroma of the rose, the companions enter the portal of another realm. See or Yakar. And in Brachas, it says in the name of Rav, what is it that gives enjoyment to the soul and not the body? You must say that it is fragrance. And then note 18, they arrived at another orchard accompanied by Rabbi Eli, who now assumes the image of a man as radiant as the masters of Mishnah. As mentioned above, the face of a human and the face of an eagle both figure prominently in Ezekiel's vision. Onto the significance of the term pardes, the orchard, see above note 3.
Okay, great. So let's continue. We're in the middle of 59. He came to those who were seated.
Amar le'inam diyasve havu yakar lamari masnisa de asuhacha.
Give honor to the masters of Mishnah.
The hamarehon achmilon palion rabravan hafa.
Who have come here. For them,
Amar
shown them great wonders here.
Amar chad minayu isbechu simana.
One of them said, "You have a sign, insignia."
Amruhin.
They replied, "Yes."
Apiku train v'radin v'archu bahu.
They took out the 2 roses and smelled them. Okay, go ahead, Zev, and read notes 19 and 20, please.
19, he said to those who were seated, Rabbi Eli tells the masters of Mishnah to welcome the companions who are now themselves considered masters. And note 20, on the 2 roses, see above. So again, with the 2 roses, but we only were introduced to the second one.
Okay. So remember, last week, they already went to visit one of these yeshivas, Yeshiva Shalmaila, one of the many heavenly yeshivas. And we know that there's different categories. We're mostly familiar with pardes, and this may have parallels to that, Pshat Remez Drush Sod. But when you're learning Gemara, there's other terms for different rabbis had like different roles to play. So, for example, the Tana isn't just a period. It actually represented a person who remembered vast amounts of mishnayot and perhaps braisot by heart, and they were like a walking encyclopedia, not of the understanding of the Mishnah per se, but just the words of the Mishnah, the words of the Tosefta, the words of the Brisa. But so the masters of Mishnah here doesn't literally mean those who only repeat the Mishnah and don't know the Talmud, but it does mean the emphasis is on Mishnah. And we'll see what that means in terms of the Mesivta Derakia. But it's fascinating to say that it's almost like, hey, we've got different types of shuls here, different types of yeshivas here. It never ends. You get up there, it's the same thing. You know, there are the specialists that have their specialty, and you could go from yeshiva to yeshiva, but each yeshiva has its own focus. So so let's look and see. Let's look for ourselves and say, why are these teachings connected to the Mishnah as opposed to the next one that will be the Masters of Agada? Like, let's try to figure out why they're giving these explanations. Because of course, in the Zohar, like all of Torah, Mishnah quickly turns into Kabbalah. And Agada is already Kabbalah, but it's always based on other parts of Torah, like the Chumash, like the Mishnah. So let's still try to see in which ways each of the Mesiftot do to some degree stick to their kind of title heading. Okay, let's continue.
Amru Tivu Mare Mesifta.
They replied, yes.
I think I'm a little
They said, be seated. By the way, that's the second word we have, at least the obvious word, that we also say when we invite the Ushpizen. We say Ulu, right? Enter, and then we say Tivu. Now that you're in the Sukkah, Avraham Avinu, Tivu, come and sit. They said, be seated. Now, again, there's a very important thing about being seated, even though we know there's no seating above, so to speak. But, you know, it says about the tzaddikim in Ganein that Yoshvim ve'atarasehem b'rosham, they're sitting with their crowns on their head. In other words, it's a yeshiva. What do you do in yeshiva? You sit. Okay.
That's where the black hat comes from.
Yeah.
Itrosam, Baroshem. Yeah. Tivu zakoik shot, achidu behu v'yosfu.
Be seated, O truly virtuous ones. They grasped them and they sat down. There's a lot of love going on, a lot of brotherly, sisterly, whatever. Actually, it's brotherly. There is going to be, don't think, by the way, that they're all men. We're going to learn about a woman's yeshiva as well. I don't know if we'll get to it tonight. But Miriam is leading a seminary. It doesn't say seminary. Yeah, the first women's seminary ends up in the Zohar. It doesn't use the word seminary. But it's fascinating that there is a women's yeshiva, Shalmaila. And we'll get to that later.
Well,
right?
Probably like our structure. The men were on Zoom and the women were on the Facebook Live.
Yeah, something like that. At that time, they learned their 30 laws. They didn't know before, and other mysteries of Torah. Now, this is important that we read note 21. Go ahead, Zev, on that.
Note 21 on be seated. The masters of Mishnah invite the companions to join them, and these new arrivals eagerly learn fresh insights. On the theme of 30 halachot, see Sukkah in the Talmud, where it says, it happened once that Rabbi Eliezer spent Shabbos in Upper Galilee, and they asked him for 30 halachot among the halachot of Sukkah. Concerning 12 of these, he said, I have heard from my teachers. Concerning 18, he said, I have not heard anything. Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, just the opposite. Concerning 18, he said, I have heard. Concerning 12, he said, I have not heard.
So there's this concept, there's a lot of other parallels here, not just to that Talmud. There's a number of Talmudic comments that say at certain periods, Moshe or Joshua or the Nevi'im, they simply forgot stuff. I mean, and then somebody came and kind of figured it out. They remembered, they extrapolated, they had a prophecy that reminded them of what it was. And again, in the idea of Torah Sheba'al Peh, transmission of Torah from generation to generation, this concept of forgetting and then remembering is fraught with danger. But what you can also say on some level of what it means is that the Zohar is remember I said this obviously makes sense in terms of why it would be the Mari Mishnah, the masters of the Mishnah, that would be the ones who would be learning the forgotten Mishnayot or Halachot in this case. But perhaps it's a little more than that. Perhaps even though the job of the Talmudist, the job of the posek, is simply, it would seem, to just like learn the material and then best apply it to even a new situation based on the core concepts and seeing how they would then follow in this situation what it's most similar to. There is this concept of forgetfulness, and it's human to forget. I learn with Rabbi Tendler, the grandson of Rav Moshe Feinstein, who took copious notes to his grandfather's oral statements. In other words, for every psak that Rav Moshe wrote into a tshuva, there must have been greater amounts of responsa that weren't written as responsa. They were just orally told over. And he was his grandfather's right-hand man for 10 plus years. During that whole period, he wrote down every conversation that he had, every thing that his grandfather, as he was like his grandfather's secretary. So he has like these notebooks that are tremendous. I mean, but they're illegible. He should live and be long. And it's a huge project to just figure out what those notebooks say and cross-reference them and publish them. These are the type of things that happen with every gadol. For example, one of the great gedolim is a Rabbi Hirschsprung from Toronto, whose daughter and son-in-law, the Newmans from Toronto, are dear friends of the Shul. And I know they have a big project ahead of them. They're already working on it. I don't know how far along they are, is to kind of take these notes. I don't know how many notebooks. I don't know how, it's a huge project. And every great rabbi like that, as much as they have published, there's so much more that's unpublished, either in form of little note scraps of notebooks, or much more than just that. Their students, having learned with them and having taken some notes, but only they can decipher that. I am privileged to know a lot of the kind of scribes of the different rabbis, right? It's the same thing in Chabad, right? So I'm friends with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and one of the other was my uncle, Rabbi Oltein, who was very instrumental in Likutei Sichos. Rabbi Yoel Khan is a cousin of mine. These are people that they have a certain memory of what was said. Some of that's in published. Actually, a lot of it's been published, Bilti Muga, which means unedited, meaning it wasn't that the Rebbe approved it. And then there's obviously the Sichos, the Maimonim, like the Likutei Sichos. So this concept of forgetting Torah is huge. It's huge. Comes the Zohar and brings it up right away. Oh, the Mari Mishnah, the masters of Mishnah, right away they sat down and they taught them 30 halachot that were forgotten. What is it trying to tell us? Besides for the obvious, besides for just being a very similar story that we've already heard in the Talmud. So what I would like to think it's trying to say is more than this Talmud that in Sukkah is another Talmud that has to do with other times they forgot. And I don't know if it uses the word that they reestablish it with Ruach HaKodesh, because usually you can't establish, at least from post Maimonides, you don't really use Ruach HaKodesh to understand the Torah. The Torah has to be understood on its own. And he understands the Nevi'im to just simply be like rabbis. But the Zohar is introducing another concept of Ruach HaKodesh here, not the literal Ruach HaKodesh to like decipher the law, but a figurative remembering that's connected to the masters of the Mishnah as seen by the companions that are equal to the companions. The companions are equal to them, which is a big praise for both of them, and saying that they need each other, so to speak. So it's introducing a mystical element to the teachings of the halacha, to the remembering of the halacha, to this kind of process that we understand on a surface level how easy it is for a rabbi to teach. And if a rabbi teaches and nobody remembers and nobody writes it, or that the students who remember it don't teach it to their students, it's gone. Comes the Zohar and introduces this concept of remembering what was forgotten, that there's some mystical element. What it is, we'll see. But that's my theory. Okay, let's continue.
Is there a nuance here that the halachot have a number associated with them? They're 30. And then the Razan HaCharanim don't have a number. They're just the other secrets. So there's sort of are the other secrets kind of explanations or subparts of the 30? So they also sort of have a number? Or in actuality, they're like some other secrets. And it's a little bit like what you're describing, which is like, sometimes things have to be transitioned and provided to the next generation as a tradition, and those get a number. When you give something a number, they're 30, I give 30 to the next person, and they give it to the next person. The secrets don't have a number because they kind of like, they might just be for the person or for the time. And to the extent that they carry forth and they're associated or parasitic and carry forward to the next generation, great. If not, then they would just Razan HaCharanim without another number, without a number, sort of without a quantity or a concretization to them. Is that
So
basically I'm asking really a question, which is, it's interesting that it says, okay, 30 halachot, and then, some other secrets.
yeah.
Like, why don't you say 10 secrets, 9 secrets, 22 secrets, or secrets relating to these 30? It sounds like it's some amorphous, body of something, maybe not even knowledge. It's
So
sort
the
of,
interesting question, because it's almost a question the Talmud would ask. So for example, often when the Mishnah does offer a number, the Talmud asks what seems to be a ridiculous question, where it says, why does the Mishnah say 39 melachot? Like, can't we count on our own? I'm like, well, actually, it's good to say a number so we can identify the amount as we go through the thing. But yet the Gemara tries to always learn out an additional teaching from the number that's offered when there's a list of whatever it's talking about. And the Gemara kind of thinks that we're not stupid, we can count it on our own. Although the Mishnah has to be written in a way that we can memorize it. So from a practical level, of course, it makes sense to give a number. But so if you want to extrapolate using the Talmud's logic, say, why does it have to list 30? And if it does have to list it, why doesn't it list the amount of the secret teachings that accompany it? And the answer is that, I don't know what the answer is, but possibly you have kind of like this concept of you're counting a certain thing, and it represents, it limits. It has a reason why it's that number. And the Mishnah like will often have why we say the Gemara will come up with some answer of why that number. Why is it significant to have that number? It'll come up with an answer of what it teaches. In addition, in other words, we learn something from the number. So what can we learn from?
Can I just interrupt you a second, Rabbi? It ties into Shimon Bar Yochai, that you have his statement in Mishnah in Avot, where he talks about the crown of priesthood, the crown of royalty, and the crown of Torah, but the crown of good name exceeds them all, right? Isn't one of those three given over to 30? Isn't the crown of priesthood gained through 30 attributes?
You're better with numbers. I'll trust you if you say so, David.
No, I think one of them was them's achieved with 30.
There's 18. There's 32. There's all, there's the. I'm trying to remember is it 30 character traits of that for the?
I think it's the priesthood.
Could be.
But I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No. I'm struggling for a good answer for Ben. So if anybody wants to help out here and tell me what the 30 is.
It's in Pirkei Avot in chapter 5 or 6.
Yeah. Actually, Malchut is acquired with 30 Ma'alot.
Oh, there you go.
Huna with 24 and Torah with 28. So you are right. It is in Pirkei Avot, and it does mention Kahuna. There's those three categories, and
it's the big Lamed.
yeah. Yep. So now, okay, David, thank you. You gave the answer to me today. You gave the answer to Ben. So the answer is very obvious now that we looked it up in Pirkei Avot. 30 is Malchut. Malchut is Torah Sheba'al Peh, is the oral Torah. That's a good answer. Thank you, David.
Do I get a crown?
You get a crown, yeah. And why additional things that are not enumerated, the secret, so to speak? I think it's actually also there's in the prior mishnah, even though it's not actually mishnayot, the 6th chapter, Pirkei Avot, it says, and not only this, like many other things as well, like it's the 30 because the 30 is symbolic of malchut, of acquiring malchut, and these secrets as well. Okay, let's continue. It's not a good answer. The question is better than the answer, but let's continue.
Ahadru lagabe inun mare mikrah.
They return to the masters of scripture.
Ashkachu dehava amre ani amarti elokim atem uvnei elyon kolchem.
Discussing now again. So they must. It doesn't say that they left one cave and went back to the other cave, but essentially they went back. Okay. Now that the big adventure of getting in, and so to speak, is they got in, there'll be new adventures, but they went back to the place of the masters of scripture, and they found them discussing a verse in Psalms 82, verse 6. I myself said, go on, Ben.
Ani amarti elokim atem uvnei elyon kolchem.
I myself said, you are gods, children of the Most High, all of you. It's a beautiful psalm. I think that I remember when in Chabad they had every year they would say the psalm, the psalm of the Rebbe's birthday. They still do it. Soon they're gonna finish all the Psalms. I don't know where they're gonna go afterwards. So there was a beautiful song on the Yamarti Elokim Atem Uvnei Elyon Kolchem Kum Elokim Shaf Haaretz. Anyway, it's a while ago. So is it beautiful passage? I said you are God's children of the Most High, all of you. However,
Ani amarti b'shata
I myself, when you placed doing naseh before listening nishma, that behold, you are God's. A lower, a non-capital G. You're like malachim. You're like angels. You know, you're not physical beings anymore that are limited by your bodies. But as soon as you drew upon yourself the evil impulse, then the Psalms continues. Yet, indeed, like a human, you shall die. It's the next verse. Just as a human death brings him down to the dirt, to the dust, so that the evil impulse within him may be obliterated. And it is that evil impulse that dies and is consumed within him. Okay. Let's read the notes. Note 22, Zab, please.
Note 22, on they returned to the masters of scripture. The companions returned to the master of scripture, whom they had encountered previously. In rabbinic sources, the verse from Psalms is applied to the Israelites at Mount Sinai, who initially achieved a semi-divine status by placing doing before listening, that is, by declaring all that Hashem has spoken, naseh v'nishma. We will do and we will heed or listen. Thereby the people demonstrated true faith, committing themselves to fulfill God's word even before hearing the details. However, as soon as Israel worshipped the golden calf, they fell back into the clutches of mortality. See Sifrei on Deuteronomy. You stood at Mount Sinai and said, all that Hashem has spoken, naseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. I myself said, you are gods, from Psalms. As soon as you said of the calf, these are your gods, O Israel, I myself said to you, yet indeed like a human you shall die. The next line. In the Talmud in Avodah Zarah, it says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Israel accepted the Torah only so that the angel of death would have no dominion over them. As it is said, I myself said, you are God's children of the Most High, all of you. Now that you have acted corruptly by worshiping the golden calf, yet indeed like a human you shall die. There are a number of other places where it has a similar motif. The conclusion of this paragraph indicates that the process of death and decomposition, like the evil impulse, is purged.
Okay, so the truth is this concept of immortality and subsequent mortality is a reoccurring theme. It starts in the Garden of Eden, pre-eating from the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve don't have a Yetzer Hara in them, and then somehow when they fall for the Nachash HaKadmoni, the primal serpent, they descend into post Garden of Eden. Death is decreed on them in the world, and this kind of story keeps re-happening, and then it significantly rehappens at the time of standing before Sinai, and subsequently at the 40 days when they see Moses not coming down, or they assume he's dead or something, and they worship the golden. Okay.
Is it interesting that they go to the place where Morei Mikra are sitting, and it just happens to be they're discussing a piece of Psalms instead of like Chumash itself? Just
Yeah.
seems like an interesting, like, little twist
So
on.
you're pointing out something interesting, that perhaps the mikrah is not what we in yeshiva think as chumash is mikrah, shnayim mikrah. We Maver Sedra, we read the parsha every week, but mikra is much more expansive. It is part of it's partially also all of the prophets and the ketuvim, which includes the Tehillim.
I mean, it happens to be that the one that they were talking about is sort of like the essence of like the Jewish nation and the Jew receiving the Torah, etc. So it makes sort of
It's
sense, but it's still.
It does, but it is so. It's a good observation. It's a good observation. I mentioned before that Maimonides he precipitated kind of the yeshiva world's lack of interest in Nevi'im and Ksuvim. And it's actually based on some parts of the Talmud, I think maybe the Yerushalmi, that says stuff that like when Mashiach will come, we're not gonna, the prophets are not gonna be significant. It'll be the Torah and the halachot. There are things like that, and Megillat Esther, that'll be the surviving thing. So it's interesting. I don't know how much we want to read into this, but I do, like you did point out, that it is talking about the Torah being given, and both the Hakdama of the Torah, and it's interesting because I taught recently, a couple of weeks ago, stuff about, and I give my Gemara share on Brachot. One of my Gemara talks on Brachot was about a series of dialogues between Moshe and God, in which Moshe successfully defends the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, from God's wrath, both at the time of the worshiping the golden calf, and again in the parsha, last week's parsha, which the Rav Mesivta is embedded in, which is Parshas Shlach, in the subsequent, after the spies give the bad report, which happens to be also, those times are very reminiscent of the times that we're in right now. The month of Tammuz is the main month that the spies were scouting out the land of Israel. They returned, as we know, famously. The 9th of Av was the night that everyone rebelled. So they must have returned on the 8th of Av, and then the 9th of Av, everyone rebelled, didn't want to go up to the land of Israel. I don't know the exact name there, but, and then of course, Shiva Asar Tammuz, the next significant day on our calendar, other than Gimel Tammuz, right? This is the 17th of Tammuz. It is the breach of the walls of Jerusalem and so on, many other things, but it really was precipitated all by the Egel, the worshiping the golden calf. So it's very relevant, this thing as well, not just that it's Dylan, but what it's talking about. And it seems like some of the Rishonim, and it's almost like these two stories mesh into one. I was talking about how much the Talmud gives us to the Moses to win an argument with God is considered a great God who can reconsider his position based on a human having a point of view. Okay, anyway, but let's continue.
Omaru Savada Alayu.
The old man presiding over them said,
Uf hachaksiv ufigrechem atem yiplu b'midbar hazeh.
here too it is written, your own corpses will fall in the desert. That was again in last week's parsha, when God said, you guys are going to die in the desert. You're not going in. You said bad things about the land, or you listened to the spies. You didn't trust me. You're going to die in the desert. What is, now we're going to, again, here it is, another verse. and we're going to particularly emphasize one word. What is meant by pigrecha?
Yetzer hara kalil dechar v'nukva.
This is the evil impulse, including male and female. Again, the main goal of the Zohar here, again and again, we already did it last week, we're doing that for a little while now, is that it's exonerating the generation of the midbar, of the desert. It's saying they were cursed to die, but not their souls. They were cursed to end up in the desert. Their bodies, but they have Gan Eden, they have Olam Haba, they have Tchit HaMesim, they have all of the reward, so to speak, which the Zohar doesn't just understand as reward. That's part of Kabbalah and Chassidut, is that it's just a reality it's Olam Haba. It's the world that's constantly coming into being, that they did go into Olam Haba, but what died is their bodies, or in this case, even more, it was the Yetzer hara is the cause of death. It was their sin that died, but not them themselves. Obviously, they did die, but meaning their souls were still able to go into Gan Eden. So now we're looking at that word, because pigrechem also is going to be cross-referenced with a verse in Samuel, first book of Samuel, when there's a battle between, I believe it's the Amalekim. The Amaleki hit a village in Yehuda, and they capture everyone in the village. They don't kill them. I think they just took all the women and children with them and pillaged the city, and then burnt it to the ground. And when David came, everyone wanted to rebel that this had happened. And he said, wait a minute, let me call the Urim V'Tumim, let me consult here, or I don't remember what the language was. And then he's like, should I go chase after them? Will I reach them? And he's told, yeah, go chase after them. And then he arms a group of his soldiers. I don't remember, I think it was 600 people. And then at some point, 200 of them are fatigued and they can't cross the river. So they stay on the other side. Anyway, that's what we need to know for this next thing. So the word for fatigue is the same root as this pigru, this corpse, which the Zohar is going to suggest isn't just physical death. It means when the body, some element of the body is deficient. Okay, so this is idea here we're going to be learning in this section of Zohar is kind of like the deficiency that we have is not the soul, it's some part of the Yetzer hara. And that's the problem of this generation. So it's interesting because one way of explaining the generation of the desert is they were very high, great, but they still had a big Yetzer hara and they couldn't overcome that. Okay, let's continue.
Chesronin de isbechu de Yetzer hara nachis tadir lechesrona v'lo salik.
This is the evil impulse, including male and female, the deficiencies within you. For the evil impulse always to sense the deficiency. It always finds that thing that's wrong. Because it's interesting, because the Gemara has a beautiful teaching about the Yetzer hara. What it does is first it gets you to sin, and then it turns you in. And which could either mean it first gets you to fail, and then it makes you feel bad about yourself, not in a way that you're become a better person. Now you just feel of yourself as like a sinner, and it's like a spiral. Rabbi Nachman said that the root of depression is from sin. So, okay, let's go on.
Bakodesh malin v'lo moridin, b'miso'avu moridin tadir v'lo malin.
Holiness, one goes higher. Malin b'kodesh, right? We say that for a number of mitzvot, particularly the most famous one in the Gemara is when the opinion that explains why Beis Hillel says you add most of a holach is malin b'kodesh v'ein moridin. We increase holiness, we don't decrease. But there are other cases like that as well. That we say Ma'alim B'Kodesh, that have a halachic implication as well. That we go like, why do we put on, for example, the Shel Yad before the Shel Rosh, right? So the concept is the Shel Rosh has more kedusha, so Ma'alim B'Kodesh, we increase by first doing the Shel Yad and then the Shel Rosh. The same thing probably with Talus and Tefillin. Why do we put on the Talus first? The Ma'alim B'Kodesh. I might be getting which one it is confused, but that's the basic premise that has a halachic implication a number of times. So when it comes to Kedusha, holiness, we want to be increasing in holiness, but unfortunately, when it comes to the Yetzer Hara is the opposite. It descends. It brings us down. In defilement, one always regresses and does not rise.
Valda ikrun pigrechem chesronim docha.
Your corpses, your deficiency. So he's basically saying that the Yetzer Hara is a mini death. It's meaning anytime the Yetzer Hara gets a hold of you, it's like for example, what is the Yetzer Hara? It's like it's an opportunity that you had to do a mitzvah, you didn't do it. So what happened? You missed out on a mitzvah. So it's like a little death of that mini mitzvah, you know. Now, as it said, now here's the verse.
Asher pigru me'avoras hanachal.
Who pigru were too weak to cross the wadi. I thought it was a river.
Sofa de krocha.
The end of the verse proves it. Now, again, that's the whole story I just told you. I filled in the gaps about the little story in why they had to cross the river. What were they doing? And in the end of the on 61, page 61 on top, in the end of the verse it proves it. As is written, Yiplu, they will fall. This is going back to Numbers 14, you know, the section about the post bad news of the Meraglim. They will fall and not tiplu, you will fall. Meaning it's referring to not you, but the part of the Yetzer Hara part, the part that's descending into deficiency. Again, let's stop for a moment and talk about what is it that the Zohar believes is mikrah, is a pasuk in the Torah. What is a pasuk in the Torah? Anyone? Anyone want to fill in a little bit about how the Zohar views the role of mikrah?
It's the name of God, and each pasuk is a name of God.
Exactly what I wanted. Exactly. And what is the name of God doing?
It's communicating with Bnei Yisrael.
Exactly. Now, where does the name of God here is a parallel because of David Newton and Ben's question? We now understand something very deep of why the Balei Mikrah and the Balei Mishnah are talking about the same thing on different levels. Here we're talking about the dialogue between the good soul and the bad soul, the pigru, but it's not you. It's part of you, but it's not the whole you. You're not going to actually die. That part of you is the deficiency. So it's a conversation between what? You and your dark side. One of the names of God is the name that's descending into death, so to speak. The nun that's descending into death. The machut, sheraglea yoredet mavet, that its feet are coming into death. Meaning, the shechina begaluta has a little bit of death in it. The Yetzer Hara has a little bit of death in it. What did we talk about? That's the mikrah. What did the mishnah talk about? The 30. What's the 30? Forgetting is what? It's a little bit of death. What's this? The decree of death. What's this? The Yetzer Hara. What's the 30? Malchut. We're just seeing one is from Mishnayot, Halachot, and the other is from Mikrah. Same underlying theme in the respective places. Yes,
Rabbi, can I be a smart ass for a second? And I don't want to use too much gematria. I don't want to use too much gematria, but the word mishnah is the same letters. Is gematria of 395, but it's the same letters as Menashe, and Menashe means to forget.
Very good.
I'm just saying it all ties in quite beautifully.
It's all inherent in Mishnah, right? There's Inashani Elokim. but it's that I was forgotten, but then I was remembered. It's forgetting and remembering, right? It's the power to forget and then to remember.
I feel like maybe, I mean, this is, just speculation, but maybe this is what's going on with the two roses. So maybe part of the story isn't missing, but that there's like a lapse in memory of the companions themselves. That like by the time they're given the second rose, they've already forgotten the first one. And that's why they're given the second one. Like,
Yeah, it's interesting that I don't know the whole what all of the scholars and the Talmidei Chacham have to say about why there isn't the first part of this story. Is it simply like, it's just we lost it because we lost a lot. Imagine we had all the libraries of the manuscripts of everything that was ever written. Wow, we'd have a lot, even in Torah, we'd have so much more. So that's interesting. Maybe, I don't know. I know Danny Matt's I don't think he's speculating on his own. I think he's quoting other people who are saying, could be that this was written like this, written without a beginning, just to like kind of get you to like say, what's going on here?
It kind of gives the text like this more, I don't know, like almost like a psychedelic feeling, like there's a disorientation like through this journey that they're taking.
Yeah, it definitely has some effect. Whether it was done purposely or not, well, we may never know. Okay, let's continue.
I unfortunately have to excuse myself and head to a minyan where I leave a little bit early, but I'm listening while I'm getting ready to go.
Thank you for helping set everything up again and helping people with getting on and the copies and everything like that. Okay.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to continue.
V'aldo b'midbar hazeh yitamu inon pegarim b'sham yamusu.
So in this desert, they shall come to an end.
Begin the reusa de kutsha berichu l'sheitza lahane pegarim me'olma la'olam.
It is the will of the Blessed Holy One to eradicate these corpses from the world forever. Who wants to read the note 24?
Okay, I'll do it.
The
end of the verse.
Start with note 23.
Oh, okay. The old man presiding over the masters of scripture, he quotes a verse from Parshat Shlach Lecha here and applies it to the evil impulse, which is pictured as a corpse. The plural noun, your corpses, alludes to both the male and the female aspects of the evil impulse, corresponding to the male and female demonic forces, Samael and Lilith. The evil impulse represents a human deficiency. The verse in Samuel demonstrates that the root, pagar, implies weakness, deficiency. The full verse reads, quote, David continued the pursuit, he and 400 men, and the 200 men who pagru were too faint or weak, exhausted, dead, tired to cross the Vadi Besor, stayed behind. Formulation in holiness, one progresses, derives from the rabbinic principle, quote, one raises or progresses, increases, promotes in holiness and does not lower. In the original context, this principle means that one should progress from a lesser to a greater degree of holiness and not the reverse, or that a person may be promoted to a higher or more dignified level but not demoted. And then lists a number of citations. On the converse formulation in defilement, one also regresses. It also lists a number of citations.
Okay, thank you. Note 24, go on.
The end of the verse proves it. The full verse reads, your own corpses, yiplu, will fall in this desert. The old man distinguishes between the Israelites themselves and their evil impulses, their corpses. Concerning the latter, scripture states, yiplu, they will fall. And a few verses later, in this desert they shall come to an end, and there they shall die. However, the Israelites themselves will gain eternal life as demonstrated by the presence of their souls here in the Garden of Eden. And it's from Masechet Sanhedrin. The generations of the desert has no share in the world that is coming and will not stand in the last judgment, as is said, in this desert they shall come to an end and they shall die. Numbers 14:35. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Eliezer says, of them scripture says, gather to me my devoted ones who over sacrifice seal my pact. And of course that comes from the Bad book, Psalms 55.
Thank you.
Oh, and there's some more here, sorry. Whereas the Mishnah records two conflicting views regarding the fate of the generation of the desert, here the old man assigns one fate to the Israelite corpses, namely their evil impulse, and the other to the Israelites themselves.
Okay, great. Let's continue reading. Ben, we're going to go back up. The Rabbi Eli said,
1 second. I think something happened. Sorry.
Rabbi Eli, Zakar Kshait.
Amalu, okay, got it. Sorry. Amalu Rabbi Eloi, Zakoi Kashot Ulu V'Sechamu.
Eli said, "O truly virtuous ones, enter and see.
The Harishu is Misar Lachu.
Permission has been granted for you to enter
Lameol Ad Hahu Asar the Parachta Parisa.
until the place where the curtain is spread.
Zakol Cholakechon.
Happy is your share.
Kamu Va'olu Goduchta Chada.
They rose and entered a certain place.
V'Havutamon Marehon the Agada.
There were masters of Agadah.
V'Anpehon Menaharon Kinehiru de Shemsha.
Face is shining like the radiance or the shining of the sun.
Amru Man Elaine.
They said, "Who are these?"
Amar Lahon Elaine Marehon the Agada.
Notice they didn't ask for the insignia. He replied, "These are the masters of Agadah."
B'Chaman B'Chol Yoma Nehiru de Araisa Kadkayos.
And every day they see the radiance of Torah fittingly.
Kaimu Ushmo Kamamilun Chadatin Ba'araisa.
They stood and they heard numerous new words of Torah.
V'lo Isyehiv Lon Rishu Lamea Lagabayu.
They were not permitted to enter amongst them. So they were kind of standing on the outside of the group. They weren't like included as equals. Okay. Let's read notes 25 and 26, Reb Yossi.
Master of Agadah, who delve into the deepest secrets. See, here Agadah as implies Kabbalah, is indicated by Hagahot Marahu, or and it also mentions Oryakar. Go on to 26.
Yeah.
To enter among them, to join the masters of Agadah.
Okay, we're going to continue on page 61. Rabbi Eli said to them, "Enter another place and see."
Amalei Rabbi Eloi. Ulu L'Duchta Achra B'Sechamu.
Enter another place and see.
Olu L'Goginta Achra.
Entered another garden.
V'Chamu Uvhachi Karan Kibrin Yad Meishim.
They also saw people digging graves and dying immediately,
Umishadrin Chayin Begufin Menaharan Kadishan.
and coming back to life in radiant holy bodies.
Amrulei Maihai.
He said to them, what is this?
Amrulei Da'avde B'Chol Yoma.
He replied, they do this every day.
Umiyad D'Shachve Misakla Huzuam Abisha De Kabila B'Kadmisa.
As soon as they lie in the grave, that evil slide they received at first is consumed,
B'Kaiman Miyad Begufin Chadatim Menaharan.
and they immediately rise with illuminated new bodies.
Be'inun Gufin Kadishan De Kaime Altura De Sinai.
The holy bodies that stood at Mount Sinai. In other words, they received the holy body that we had when we were purified, when we stood at Sinai. Before, exactly as you see, so they stood at Mount Sinai in bodies without any filth at all. But as soon as they drew upon themselves the evil impulse, they changed into other garments of previous bodies, strange bodies, This goes with the section that we were doing in the Sabbath Mishpatim of the various kind of reincarnations of the different levels of the bodies that the soul has to go through. So to speak, even in heaven, you have to lose your body. Now, it doesn't mean their physical body, because they don't have physical bodies in heaven. But it means the attachment that the Yetzer Hara have in them needs to be shed again and again. There's this concept we say, Yelchim Michayel Achayel. Even in heaven, you're growing, so to speak. So the tshuva that you did yesterday isn't good enough for today. Like, why doesn't this just happen once? Why does it happen daily? Now, it could mean because it wants to reconcile the two opinions in the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva, and I don't know who the other one was, Rabbi Shmuel, about whether or not the Mesa Midbar, the generation that died in the desert because of the Chet Amaraglim coming on the heels of the Chet Egel, were going to have Chet HaMetim and Olam Haba. Maybe what it's saying is they do have Chet HaMetim, they do have Olam Haba, but in the meantime, they have to go through a rebirth daily. So it's like there's a component of death even in their Olam Haba. Maybe, I don't know the answer. It's just, to me, it's more like reconciling this whole kind of like Maimonidean versus Nachmanadian concept of Tchiat HaMesim and the Guf Naki, the Guf Zach. Okay, let's see. Are there any notes on that?
A lot.
This is a little bit like the Elokai Neshama that we say, right? Ata Asid, Litla, Ulav Zira. It like could be talking about this sort of back and forth daily process.
Yeah. Yeah, but this would be like you die and are reborn every day. Yeah.
Yeah. Ata Asid, Litla, Ulav Zira. Maybe it's the same sort of process over there that we're referring to.
Yeah, but this is different because if supposedly they now have transcended their body, why would they have to
do this daily?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Question, yeah. That's a very good question. We don't know the answer, but let's see if the notes illuminate a little bit.
And this is only about a page of notes.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, people digging graves. Members of the generation of the desert who die in symbolic death each day. At Sinai, the Israelites were cleansed of impurity, injected into humanity by the primordial serpent.
Page 62. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I'm just telling everyone something.
Oh, okay. Let's see, where is it? Primordial serpent in the Garden of Eden. And they could have become immortal. On mortality and the consequence of eating from the tree of knowledge, see Genesis 2:17, 3:3, 19. But when they sinned by worshiping the golden calf, the serpent regained his power over them, condemning them to mortality, represented here by their, quote, previous bodies, strange bodies, unquote. The verse in Exodus now implies that the Israelites stripped themselves of their immortal, radiant bodies. Here in the Garden of Eden, the Israelites, seen by the companions, are purged daily of the serpent's slime and reborn with radiant bodies. And it reference Bavli Vamot 103b, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. When the serpent copulated with Eve, he rejected her with Zohama, filth, or slime lust. Israel, who stood at Mount Sinai, their filth ceased. Star worshippers who did not stand at Mount Sinai, their filth did not cease. On the verse in Exodus in Tanhuma, the Buber construction of that, Shalach, add, you, quote, you came to Mount Sinai and I myself descended and spoke with you along with thousands and myriads of angels whom I brought down for your sake. I entrusted each and every Israelite with 2 angels. Rabbi Yochanan said, 1 angel girded each Israelite with his weapon, and 1 placed a crown upon each Israelite's head. Rabbi Simo said he clothed them with his royal purple cloak. Rabbi Shimon, son of Yohai, said he adorned them with weapons engraved with the ineffable name. And as long as they possessed these, no evil could touch them, neither the angel of death nor anything else. As soon as they sinned with the golden calf, Moses said to them, now take off your ornaments, and I will know what I should do with you. Exodus 33:5. At that moment, the people heard this evil word, and they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. What is written? The children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments. Just as Adam's sin had inflicted death upon the world, so that Israel sinned with the golden calf. And then it mentions, a Bavli Avodah Zarah for that. On that, members of the generation of the desert lying in the grave regularly see, and this is Jerusalem Talmud, Tanet, Echa Rabbah, Pticha, on the passage of Tanhuma, it starts listing just a whole bunch of references. This is difficult.
Okay.
Oh, you don't see it as koshy at all.
Yeah.
Because this actually almost sounds, if one may say, almost a little Christian.
Why is that? Because the evil?
Original sin. This makes Sinai supposedly removed the original sin, but now it's back again.
Temporarily.
Temporarily
removed it.
Every day for these guys, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And if they are, if you want, sole ancestors of every Jew that will ever be, through the Gilgulim, we are inheritors of theirs.
I think, the difference between Judaism and Christianity in terms of the original sin is not nearly as pronounced as the average rabbi makes it. Of course, there's a difference, but it's not like we have a lot of stuff on the power of both. We don't call it the original sin, but the Chetei Tzadas, that sin and the subsequent other sins. It's a pattern. We have that sin already happening, not as a sin, but as a tzimtzum and the shviyat hakelim. We have it, reoccurring in many times. So I don't have an issue with it. It's a reoccurring theme,
Yeah. Well, I don't want to make it too Christological here, but I one time read, and I'm sorry, I used to know this and I forgot it, that circumcision removes the sin of Adam.
Okay, that's good. I mean, we don't have the power of the original sin quite as a thing as Christians do, but we do have something that's pretty powerful nonetheless, But yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting thing. I think we're going to wrap it up for today. This is one of the few times I'm like, oh man, we should just keep going, but I think we're not going to because it's already after 10. And but it's great stuff. Great stuff. Thank you, everyone, for.
Naftali, you're the best.
Thank you, David Barrett. And it's good, It's really.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with
We are
David.
next
Just because we were quiet doesn't mean we don't also agree that you're the best.
That's okay.
Are we on next Wednesday?
Yeah, God willing, I don't see why not.
All right.
Yeah. But we definitely should be on.